thinking of taking a year off university next year, and I'd like to travel around Europe.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 7. Listen carefully to the first part of the conversation and answer questions 1 to 7.
Good morning. How can I help you?
I'm thinking of taking a year off university next year, and I'd like to travel around Europe.
OK then. Do you have any idea where you'd like to go?
Well, I was thinking of starting in France and then working my way up to Eastern Europe, possibly going as far as Slovakia.
Well, there are a number of ways you can do this, and we have various options available. It really depends on your budget and how you'd like to travel.
That's just the thing, really. I've just finished my second year at university, so obviously I'd like to do it in as cheap a way as possible.
That's fine. Could you give me a rough idea of the price range you're looking at?
Realistically speaking, I'm hoping to pay between about £700 and £900. I could stretch to £1,100, but that's really my limit.
How long are you thinking of going for?
About 10 months.
To be honest, you'd be better off travelling for about 7 months, if that's your budget.
OK, that's not too bad. So, how would you suggest I travel?
Well, because of the time limit, I don't think walking is a viable option. Of course, in this day and age, the most convenient way to get around is by flying, particularly if you've got quite a bit you want to see in a short space of time. Saying that, I still think the best way to get around Europe is by train. As a student, you can also get a student rail card, which means cheaper fares.
That sounds brilliant. How do I go about getting a rail card?
Well, if you decide that's what you want to do, then we can organise that all for you. You'll need to fill in a form and provide us with 2 passport photos, and we'll do the rest. It costs about £36 plus about £10 administration costs.
Great. That's really not expensive at all. And what about buses? I was just thinking if I decide to go to places which are a bit more remote.
There are always local buses, but these are not always a good idea. They can be quite unreliable and in some areas quite dangerous because the buses tend to be overcrowded and some of the drivers drive way too fast. So I would suggest you don't do this.
That sounds quite frightening. So what are my options then?
You could hire a car, but it can be expensive. Still, I do think if you're thinking about going to smaller towns and places which are off the beaten track, then hiring a car is by far the better way to do it. You can also look at sharing the costs by hiring a car with someone else.
That's a good idea. I guess I could put a message on the internet.
You could do that, but don't forget that you meet people when you're travelling, and you'll probably find someone who's going to the same place as you are.
That's true. I want to stay in youth hostels, so I'm sure I'll find people who are interested in going to the same places. Oh, one last thing. What about taxis? I was thinking about if I go out at night. I use taxis all the time here.
But taxis abroad are a different story. In certain countries, they're no problem, but by and large, taxi fares are high.
Oh.
If you do go out at night, try walking home, but make sure you don't do this alone. Try and find people to go out with at night or come home at a reasonable time. But if you're staying in youth hostels, you should find plenty of young people to go out with at night.
I'm sure I will.
Now you have some time to look at questions 8 to 10. Now listen to the next part of the conversation and answer questions 8 to 10.
Now, have you thought about how you'd like to travel to France?
Not really, no.
There are basically 3 ways. You can go by ferry, which leaves every day and night, or there's the hovercraft, which is more pricey, but will get you there quicker, and, of course, you could fly.
Well, I don't think flying is an option for me, as it'll be too expensive. So I suppose I'll choose one of the other 2. It's a pity, really, as I don't fancy the idea of travelling by sea. Last time I did that, I got terribly seasick.
Well, you're in luck then, as at the moment there's a special deal on flights to France.
Ah.
In fact, a plane ticket is now half the price of a ferry ticket, which is usually the cheapest option.
That's great. I'll do that then. I much prefer flying anyway.
I'll need to get some details off you then. Firstly, how will you be paying? Cash, cheque or credit card? If you pay by cheque, you'll need a cheque guarantee card.
I don't have my chequebook with me, so it'll have to be by credit card.
Fine, that's no problem. If you could just sign over here, and then we'll have a look at flight times, and I can sort out a youth travel card for you.
Fine. Oh, can I use your pen, please?
No problem. Now, let's look at times. There is a flight leaving at 9 a.m. and one that leaves half an hour later. Or you can choose a later flight at 11:30.
No, I think 11:30 is too late, so I think I'd prefer the flight that leaves after 9. I'm not very good at getting up in the morning.
No problem. Just give me a moment. Right, that's booked for you. Please remember that if you want to change this, you must give 24 hours notice or you will lose your place.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2. Zoe goes to talk to her academic advisor.
First, look at questions 11 to 14. Listen carefully.
How are you getting on, Zoe? Feeling at home yet?
Well, more or less. There are still some things I need to buy, and I haven't found my way to all the facilities yet, but I really love the campus, and I've already made a few friends.
Fantastic. Now let's see what we can do to get your studies off to the right start too. You're on the foundation course, so you can take up to 8 modules. What we advise is that you take 4 modules in the first semester and, assuming everything goes well, 4 in the second. Have you decided which you want to take in this semester?
I haven't made my mind up yet. I can't decide whether to take Principles of Marketing or Introduction to International Trade.
Well, that depends on your career goal. You're planning to work in the biotechnology sector, aren't you?
Well, that's my present thinking, but I guess I might change my mind.
Right, well, marketing is a broad general subject that you will find really useful in a number of careers. International trade, on the other hand, is more specific. That's fine if you're sure it's the sort of work you want to do. A lot of students start off thinking about that option because it seems glamorous, but marketing can also be an exciting career, and there's a wide choice of jobs. Maybe you ought to wait until your career ideas are a bit more definite before you go down that road.
Yes, I see. I could take international trade next year, couldn't I?
Sure, you could do international finance as well. So, in your first semester, you've got principles of marketing, introduction to economics, banking and finance, and let's see, principles of financial accounting. How do you feel about that as a package?
It's okay, I think.
Before the broadcast continues, look at questions 15 to 20. You will now listen to the second part of the talk.
But I'm a bit worried about the maths. There'll be some statistics to do, won't there?
Basic statistics, yes, but nothing more difficult than your last year of school maths.
I know, but our maths syllabus was a bit old-fashioned. Mostly algebra, geometry, trigonometry and stuff, hardly any stats.
Right, well, it sounds as if you could do with the maths brush-up course. Can I arrange for you to attend just the classes on statistics, if you like?
That'd be great. I didn't want to do the whole of maths again, but the stats classes would make me feel much more confident, thanks.
Hang on a minute, there's one more thing. Your English. Now, you know you have to reach a satisfactory standard in English by the end of your first year to be allowed to go on to the main BSc course.
Yeah, now I'm in an English-speaking environment and I have to speak English all the time. I'm sure I'll be all right.
It certainly helps, but speaking isn't everything. You'll have to get your reading up to the standards where you can understand the books on your course reading list quickly. To get the information and ideas, you need to write your essays. That means you have to develop a high level of comprehension skills. You'll never get through the course material if you try to read the books intensively from cover to cover. That's why our language skills development program gives you a series of graded academic texts to study and answer questions on a limited time. You'll probably find it hard at first, having to work against the clock without a dictionary.
How can I improve my skimming and scanning skills?
Good question. For that, you'll have to do a range of specially designed exercises. Sometimes these will be from a transparency, because it is often how the lecture material is presented.
Sometimes I think I'll never learn all the vocabulary. English is such an enormous language.
I know what you mean. English is the biggest language ever, at least 350,000 words. Even Winston Churchill only knew 60,000, so they say. But as an academic student, you can get a lot of help from the academic word list by Avril Coxhead of Victoria University. That's in Wellington, New Zealand.
I've studied word lists, of course, but how does this one help?
The academic word list is based on a survey of 3.5 million words of academic text. It contains 570 families of the words most commonly found in academic texts. Well, that's apart from the 2,000 most useful words in English. They come in a separate list. You can see copies of both in the library.
You said word families. Do you mean words that are similar?
In a way, yes. It means that all the different grammatical forms of a word are listed together, so you can see the nouns, verbs, adjectives, forms with prefixes and suffixes and so forth. It'll be clearer when you look at it. Anyway, Avril Coxhead gives you really great hints about how to learn the words, so it shouldn't be too daunting.
The trouble is, I tend to forget the words I learn.
Well, there are two ways you can tackle that. First, always try to learn the words in a context. Either learn a whole sentence using a word, or learn a phrase that the word typically comes in. We call phrases like that collocations.
That's a new one on me. Collocations. I'd better make a note of it.
You do that. You can find collocations in most modern dictionaries. Anyway, as I was saying, there's a second study aid I recommend for vocabulary learning. When you get an assignment, take a sheet of paper and write 4 headings. Words I can use, words I can recognise but can't use, words I'm not sure of, words I don't know. Don't bother with the simple words, of course, Then go back after 2 weeks and look at the list again. Can you move any of the words into a better column?
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear two students discussing the subject of rock art. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 27. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 27.
Hello, David.
Oh, hi, Mia. Sorry I'm a bit late.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for agreeing to help me with my assignment today. I really needed to go over it with someone.
Sure. You were going to talk about European rock art, weren't you?
Yes, the rock drawings in the caves of Lascaux in western France.
Oh, fantastic. Over 13,000 years old, I believe. What sort of drawings are they?
They're drawings of animals on the whole, but you can also find some human representations, as well as some signs. There are roughly 600 drawings at Lascaux.
Really? Were they mostly pictures of bulls?
Well, no, actually. The animal most depicted was the horse. Have a look at this graph. It shows the distribution of the different animals. You see, first the horse, and then, after that, a sort of prehistoric bull.
Oh, OK. That's interesting, isn't it?
And the third most commonly drawn creature was the stag. There were some other animals, but these are the main ones.
What are the drawings like? I mean, what sort of style?
Well, the bulls are depicted very figuratively. They're not very realistic. They're very big by comparison to the other drawings of people and signs. They appear to be almost three-dimensional in some cases, following the contours of the cave walls, but of course they're not.
Amazing. Perhaps they felt these animals were the most impressive and needed to be represented like that.
Yeah, maybe. The drawings of humans, by contrast, consist of just simple lines, like the stick figures my little sister draws. Perhaps humans were seen as less important.
Perhaps. What about the signs? How did they draw them?
There doesn't appear to be much evidence of signs, and those that have been found are usually made up of little points.
Rather like Aboriginal art from Australia.
Yes, something like that, but not as complex, of course.
So, apart from the bulls and horses and stags, were there any other creatures depicted?
In one or two chambers you do find pictures of fish, but they're quite rare.
What sort of size is the cave? It must be quite large to have that many pictures.
Well, it's actually a number of interlinking chambers, really. Here's a map showing where the different drawings can be found.
Oh, good. Let's have a look at that.
The first 20 metres inside the cave slope down very steeply to the first hall in the network. That's called the Great Hall of the Bulls.
Here. OK.
Then, off to the left, we have the Painted Gallery, which is about 30 metres long and is basically a continuation of this first hall.
But further into the cave.
Exactly. Then we find a second, lower gallery called the Lateral Passage. This opens off the aisle to the right of the Great Hall of the Bulls. It connects the next chamber with an area known as the Main Gallery. At the end of the Main Gallery is the Chamber of Felines. There are one or two other connecting chambers, but there's no evidence of man having been in these rooms.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 28 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 28 to 30.
Is the cave open to the public today?
Well, no, because after the initial discovery in 1940, it was opened and literally millions of people came through to see the drawings. Then, in the 50s, the experts started to worry about the damage being done to the drawings, and the government finally closed the Lascaux cave in 1963.
Is that so?
It wasn't really the tourists that were doing the harm, but the fact that after thousands of years, the cave was suddenly open to the atmosphere, and so bacteria and fungi started to destroy the pictures. You need a special permit to enter the cave now, and very few people can get that, unless they're scientists or have some official status.
It's a shame, but I can see that they had to do something to protect the cave. So that means you can no longer see this rock art.
Well, not exactly. What they've done is recreate the drawings in a man-made cave, which you can visit.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, the authorities decided to reproduce the two best sections of the site, so they've created a life-size copy of the Hall of the Bulls and of the painted gallery. It's just a cement shell, which corresponds in shape to the interior of the original.
So now you can visit the caves without actually harming any of the 15,000-year-old paintings.
Mm-hmm.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4. You will hear a talk about the pitfalls and pleasures of being a postgraduate student. Look at questions 32 to 37.
Postgraduates are about as easy to define as catching steam in a bucket. Courses can be vocational, for training, as research, as a preparation for research, or a combination of these. Also, you can choose between full-time and part-time. Increasingly, the approach to postgraduate study is becoming modular. The vast majority of postgraduates are doing short, taught courses, many of which provide specific vocational training. Indeed, there has been a 400% increase in postgraduate numbers in Britain over the past 20 years. Current figures stand at just under 400,000. People undertake postgraduate study for many reasons. These may be academic, intellectual challenge, development of knowledge; vocational, training for a specific career goal; or only vague, drifting into further study. It is essential that you determine the reasons you want to become a postgraduate. If you have clear goals and reasons for studying, this will enhance your learning experience and help you to remain focused and motivated throughout your course. Where you study should be based on much more than the course you want to do. For some courses, you're likely to be there for several years, and it is important that you are happy living there. Check also what type of accommodation is available and whether the institution provides any housing specifically for postgraduates. Choosing an institution and department is a difficult process. To determine quality, do not rely on the reputation of an institution, but find out what the ratings are from the most recent assessment exercises. Find out about the staff, their reputation, competence, enthusiasm, and friendliness. Visit the department if possible and talk to existing postgraduates about their experience, satisfaction, comments, and complaints. Be very careful to check how they feel about their supervisors. Also, check what facilities are available, both at an institutional level, for example libraries, laboratory and computing facilities, and in the department, for example study room, desk, photocopying, secretarial support, etc. Everyone will have their own priorities here. I am always anxious to check the computer support available and regard it as slightly more important than library access. Your working environment and the support available to you plays an essential part in making your work as a postgraduate a positive experience. Life as a postgraduate can be very different to your other experiences of education. Things that can distinguish your experience are the level of study, independence of working, intensity of the course, the demands on your time, and often the fact that you're older than the majority of students. These factors can contribute to making you feel isolated. However, there are several ways you can make sure that this is either short-lived or does not happen at all. Many student unions have postgraduate societies that organise social events and may also provide representation for postgraduates to both the student union and the institution. Departments can also help to create a sense of identity and community, and often have discussion groups available. Don't be afraid to talk to staff about any difficulties you might be having. Of course, universities provide counselling services, but we have found that the best advice comes from talking to other postgraduates who may have faced similar difficulties.
Look at questions 38 to 40.
Financial planning is essential, since the government excludes postgraduates from student loans, and it can be difficult to maintain your student status with banks. This has implications for free banking and overdraft facilities. Do not underestimate your living costs, including food, accommodation and travel. And be careful not to budget for everything except a social life. Funding a course is one of the most challenging things people face when considering postgraduate study. Most postgraduate students finance themselves. They pay often very large fees to the institution and receive no maintenance income to support their study. Make sure you know exactly what your costs will be. Institutions often hide extra fees, like laboratory costs, behind the headline fee rate advertised. Funding can come from various sources: research councils, charities, trust funds, institutional scholarships, local education authorities, and professional bodies and organisations all offer various levels of funding. As I said before, the government excludes postgraduates from student loans, so it is essential you look to other sources. Career development loans are available from high street banks. The best advice on funding is to be proactive, persistent and patient. The postgraduate community in Britain is multinational, has a wide range of experience of life and work, and an exciting mix of goals, both career and academic. Being a postgraduate student should be a productive and fulfilling thing to do, and you will become part of a diverse and motivated social group.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.